Close your eyes and picture a world turned upside down. A world where the Cold War didn't end in the fall of the Berlin Wall, but with the hammer and sickle rising triumphantly over every capital on Earth. Imagine New York under Soviet surveillance, Paris echoing with slogans praising the Communist Party, and Tokyo's skyline dominated by state-owned megacorporations. The question isn't just who won, it's how different life would be for you, me, and everyone alive today. How would politics, culture, technology, and even the way we think be reshaped by a Soviet victory? The answer lies in a single pivot, a divergence point where history teetered, almost imperceptibly, yet decisively. A moment where tiny shifts set off a chain reaction that would change the entire world. And once that domino falls, there's no going back. If you stick with me until the end of this video, you'll see a modern world that is unrecognizable. A world where freedom, innovation, and culture are entirely redefined, and where every choice humanity made has consequences we can only imagine. You won't want to miss it. The turning point begins in the mid-1980s. In our reality, the Soviet Union collapsed under economic stagnation, political corruption, and rising nationalist movements. But imagine if Gorbachev, instead of pushing half-hearted reforms, implemented a calculated series of economic and technological strategies that stabilized the USSR. Centralized industries became more efficient, energy exports surged, and the Soviet Union secretly invested in advanced computing, aerospace, and cybernetics. These weren't small tweaks. They were transformative steps that put the USSR on a trajectory to not just survive, but dominate. Meanwhile, the United States struggled under the weight of debt, political paralysis, and social unrest. Years of military overextension, coupled with a growing public dissatisfaction after the Cold War and Vietnam, left the U.S. vulnerable. The Soviets exploited these weaknesses with surgical precision, covertly flipping alliances in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, and negotiating favorable treaties that expanded their influence while America stumbled. Imagine Fidel Castro's Cuba not as an isolated communist outpost, but a springboard for Soviet expansion across the Caribbean and Central America. Or consider Angola and Mozambique, where Soviet-backed forces secure permanent influence, changing global trade patterns and regional alliances for decades. By the late 1980s, the scales have tipped subtly, yet irreversibly. The United States is no longer the unquestioned global leader. But what happens when the rest of the world, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, is forced to confront a rising superpower with unmatched strategy, resources, and resolve? That's where the story truly begins. Once the divergence point has occurred, the consequences ripple across the globe like shockwaves from a nuclear blast. NATO, long considered the bastion of Western security, fractures under internal dissent. Countries like West Germany, France, and Italy find themselves negotiating with Soviet officials in tense, high-stakes corridors. Some treaties grant the USSR economic concessions. Others allow military bases on European soil, moves that, in our timeline, would have been unthinkable. The United States, grappling with domestic crises, watches helplessly as Soviet influence spreads. Latin America becomes a chessboard of revolutions. Nicaragua, Honduras, and even Brazil see Soviet-backed socialist governments rise, reshaping trade, resource control, and regional politics. Africa experiences a similar transformation. Soviet advisors guide regimes in Angola, Ethiopia, and Mozambique, stabilizing some governments while toppling others. Oil, minerals, and strategic ports fall under Soviet influence, giving the USSR leverage unimaginable in our timeline. Picture London's streets lined with workers' rallies chanting slogans praising collectivism, or Parisian metro stations adorned with Soviet emblems. Even in neutral countries like Switzerland and Sweden, surveillance and propaganda quietly reshape the daily lives of citizens. With global politics rewritten, resistance begins, but it is fragmented and often crushed. Underground movements in Europe and America fight to preserve democracy, but the Soviets are strategic and ruthless. Every uprising sparks a crackdown, every protest fuels propaganda, and every act of rebellion reinforces the USSR's narrative of inevitable triumph. Yet, while the governments fall and the treaties are signed, a more subtle transformation begins, one that reshapes the very fabric of daily life. Citizens, families, and entire societies must adapt to a new reality where freedom, privacy, and personal choice are tightly monitored. How does life evolve under a superpower that controls every aspect of existence? That's the question we'll explore next. Under a globally dominant Soviet Union, life is a mixture of efficiency, control, and quiet resistance. Cities everywhere, New York, London, Tokyo, even Buenos Aires, bear the unmistakable marks of Soviet hegemony. Public spaces are plastered with slogans praising collectivism, and the faces of workers, soldiers, and leaders are everywhere, reminding citizens that the state watches and expects obedience. Education is centralized and ideological. Schools emphasize loyalty to the party, collective achievement, and technical expertise, often at the expense of creativity and critical thinking. Yet, paradoxically, technological innovation thrives in areas that benefit the state. Space programs, industrial automation, and cybernetics advance at record speeds. Scientists and engineers work under strict supervision, balancing personal curiosity with ideological constraints. Immersive storytelling. Picture a Tokyo engineer secretly modifying factory robots to improve efficiency without alerting state monitors. Or a New York teenager reading a smuggled copy of an American novel in a dimly lit apartment, whispering the words to a friend as if they were contraband. Life is a constant negotiation between conformity and individuality. Cultural life is similarly restricted, but not extinguished. Art, music, and literature must align with state-approved narratives, yet underground movements flourish in hidden pockets. Jazz clubs, forbidden bookstores, and secret exhibitions give citizens glimpses of a world beyond the party's reach. The tension between survival, creativity, and rebellion defines daily life. And yet, even as the Soviets maintain this iron grip over society, tensions simmer beneath the surface. The seeds of future uprisings, resistance movements, and political intrigue are already taking root. How will the USSR respond when these human cracks widen into conflicts? And how far will this superpower go to maintain its dominance? That's the story of the next chapter: the wars, proxy conflicts, and escalating Cold War in a world already under Soviet rule. If you're intrigued by how a Soviet victory could rewrite not just politics, but the lives of ordinary people, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next section, where we delve into the human side of living under global communism, where innovation, oppression, and survival collide. With global dominance firmly in Soviet hands, the Cold War doesn't end. It escalates, but not in the way most history books describe. Instead of a standoff between two nuclear powers, the world sees a new type of conflict: asymmetric, ideological, and global. Soviet-backed regimes expand their influence in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, but resistance movements rise in response. These are not your typical guerrilla forces. They are often local militias, supported by remnants of Western intelligence agencies, underground networks, and sympathetic civilians. Some succeed, others are crushed. But every rebellion forces the Soviets to tighten their grip, creating a vicious cycle of unrest and repression. In South America, a Soviet-backed government in Brazil consolidates control over resources and infrastructure, yet hidden cells in São Paulo and Rio organize sabotage operations, disrupting supply lines and undermining authority. Across Africa, a similar dynamic unfolds. Mozambique becomes a showcase of Soviet governance, while secret insurgencies challenge both military and propaganda networks. Meanwhile, tensions in Europe simmer. Former NATO members are coerced into quasi-alliance structures under Soviet oversight. Military exercises near borders act as warnings to neighboring states. Finland, Sweden, and Austria maintain nominal neutrality, but are under intense pressure. Eastern Europe becomes a model of centralized planning and authoritarian control, showcasing the Soviet vision of order, efficiency, and ideological compliance. Imagine Warsaw under curfew, the streets patrolled by uniformed officers while citizens whisper about resistance cells. In Berlin, Soviet technocrats monitor every move, ensuring the city aligns with the grand vision of global communism. Even daily interactions, shopping, schooling, transportation, are subtly structured to reinforce obedience. Technology becomes both a tool and a weapon. Surveillance systems rival anything imagined in our timeline. Drones monitor cities, and intelligence networks are omnipresent. Yet innovation isn't entirely stifled. Scientists are allowed and even encouraged to push the boundaries of AI, robotics, and aerospace, as long as the work serves the state. But even as the Soviet Union projects power across continents, tensions with surviving pockets of resistance escalate. Could this ever spiral into a full-scale global confrontation? And if it does, would the Soviet model survive unscathed or crumble under its own weight? Fast forward to the 21st century. In a world where the Soviet Union won the Cold War, globalization looks very different. International trade is controlled through Soviet economic networks. The internet exists, but heavily regulated, monitored, and used as a propaganda tool. Social media as we know it never develops. Instead, digital platforms serve state interests, shaping thought and behavior. Culturally, the global landscape is transformed. Western films, music, and literature exist only underground or as relics of a forbidden past. Hollywood becomes a memory, while cinema thrives under state-approved studios producing heroic tales of collectivism and loyalty. In fashion, architecture, and art, a uniform aesthetic dominates, functional, monumental, and propagandistic. Individual expression is a subtle art, often hidden beneath layers of compliance. Economically, the world is more centralized. Private enterprise is rare, and multinational corporations are state-owned. Energy, transport, and essential resources are carefully allocated to maintain political stability. This efficiency fuels some technological advancements. Space exploration thrives, robotics and AI accelerate, but the cost is personal freedom. Citizens trade autonomy for the promise of security, and dissent is not tolerated. Picture a young engineer in Tokyo designing AI-powered public transit systems while constantly monitored, or a student in London submitting an essay on the virtues of collectivism while secretly reading banned literature in a hidden compartment. Life is orderly, efficient, and deeply controlled, but always tinged with quiet resistance. Even in science and innovation, competition is limited. Global collaboration exists only within the Soviet orbit, creating pockets of brilliance surrounded by regions that stagnate. Medical advancements, engineering feats, and space exploration continue, but they are leveraged primarily to reinforce power, not individual freedom or creativity. Yet, cracks appear even in this carefully managed world. Underground movements continue, technological espionage spreads, and a generation born under Soviet rule begins to question the system. Could the very tools that built this empire, technology, bureaucracy, and ideology, also sow the seeds of its undoing? The long-term impact of a Soviet victory is profound. On one hand, the world achieves a level of efficiency, industrial power, and geopolitical cohesion that was impossible in our timeline. Wars between superpowers are rare because there is only one dominant power, but local conflicts, rebellions, and covert operations persist endlessly. Societies adapt. Citizens learn to navigate surveillance, subtle propaganda, and rigid social expectations. Subcultures form quietly, finding ways to preserve individuality and creativity. Education produces technically skilled, ideologically loyal citizens, but curiosity and dissent are confined to private spaces. Politically, the Soviet Union evolves. Leadership transitions carefully, maintaining the image of stability and inevitability. Yet generational shifts create pressures. Young people, born into a tightly controlled system, grow restless. Technological literacy and access to forbidden knowledge provide the means to question authority, even from within. Imagine Moscow in 2050. Skyscrapers gleaming with solar-powered efficiency, public transport running flawlessly, but citizens whispering in secret about freedoms their grandparents once enjoyed. Across the world, cities under Soviet influence maintain order, but with undercurrents of unrest simmering beneath the surface. A victory that initially seemed absolute slowly gives rise to cracks. Small rebellions, leaks of information, and covert networks create pressure that the system must constantly suppress. This creates a world of tension, one of efficiency and power, but also quiet resistance, suspicion, and perpetual surveillance. The question becomes, can an empire built on control truly endure forever, or will human curiosity, desire, and dissent eventually dismantle even the mightiest superpower? History may have been rewritten, but human nature remains a constant variable. In the end, a Soviet victory in the Cold War would have given the world stability, technological advancement, and global cohesion, but at a cost few could imagine. Freedom, personal expression, and cultural diversity would be tightly constrained, and humanity would navigate a carefully curated existence under constant surveillance. Yet, even in this controlled world, resilience persists. Humans adapt, innovate, and resist, finding pockets of freedom wherever they can. The Soviets may have won the Cold War, but history is never truly predictable, and the human spirit always finds a way to challenge authority, even under the shadow of global communism. If you enjoyed this journey into an alternate world and want to explore more hidden paths of history, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. We've only scratched the surface of what could have been, and the next alternate history could be even more shocking. History is a tapestry of choices, consequences, and human ambition. One change, a single divergence, can rewrite the world. So next time you think about the Cold War, ask yourself, what if everything had gone differently?